Hi, my name is Steve Rahi. I am a Premier Field Engineer dedicated to supporting System Center technologies. Today's discussion will be part 6 in an ongoing series on Application Deployment in Configuration Manager 2012. Today focused back on the server side and specifically looking at packages. This is actually the first place that we're going to split and move out of the introductory level material and general administrative user experience kind of discussion that we've had up until now, and turn the page and start to take some deeper looks at how Configuration Manager 2012 processes various configurations behind the scenes. Today's discussion is focused on packages. So the agenda, again, for today is packages, but to look forward, what we're going to do on the server side on the deeper discussions is then in the next session look at applications, and then the session after that look at distribution points in a more detailed way. And then from there, we'll go back to the client side and look at how packages are processed, how applications are processed, and so on. Okay. So focusing on the packages. So a few of the components that are involved in the package deployment that you'll see that we'll work with in this discussion. SMS Executive certainly is the driving component, a key component of this. SMS Executive being the major service that runs on Configuration Manager site servers, and various components within the SMS Executive certainly play key roles for package distribution, moving around package content. The database plays a very key role in moving content back and forth. In fact, what I've tried to do on the right-hand side with this diagram is give you a bit of a flavor of what we're going to be looking at and what kind of components get involved. So specifically, let's just look at the diagram for a minute. All of the various configurations that we're going to do on the package are introduced through the admin UI. Everything the administrator does is typically introduced through the admin UI. Admin UI is an interesting component because it does store data in the database. It certainly implements configurations in the Configuration Manager database, but it doesn't do it directly. Instead, what it does is it utilizes a component known as the SMS provider that works through WMI, and through that relationship actually works with the database. So another way of saying this is the admin UI doesn't have any direct interaction with the database. It all works through the SMS provider. At least that's certainly true for packages and the vast majority of what the admin console does. There are certain pieces such as reports that will do direct database access and things like that, but the vast majority of things, collections and various other pieces, work through the SMS provider, through WMI to the database, and so on. SMS provider itself is actually a thread of the SMS Executive, and so certainly you need to have the SMS Executive up and running. This is core for the entire engine of Configuration Manager to work. Okay, so once we store information in the database, then it has to be well, there's a number of things that can happen for it, but typically you're going to see that it needs to get replicated around. There's two components, two pieces, if you will, of package content. There's what's called metadata, and that's the data that describes the package content, the stuff that you're configuring in the console. Then there's the actual content of the package, okay, the source files that you want to move around and ultimately deploy to your target clients. So when we talk about metadata versus content, then that information flows through Configuration Manager differently. So what I've tried to do here is just list out in a general way some of the components that are involved with the metadata. So again, what I kind of have here loosely is what we'll do in our demos. I have a CAS up here. It's not labeled as such, but it is a CAS. Then I have a child primary site. And you notice there are various pieces, all again threads of the SMS Executive that act in various ways on different sites. So for example, we have our SMS database monitor. You'll see that as we go through the demo. You see Distribution Manager at a CAS, which, by the way, is a piece of site information. If you've kind of been tying some things together as we go through this, I've said before that the CAS does not have the ability to have a distribution point. That's absolutely true, but it does have a distribution manager component. And we'll see that, why that kind of thing is there, and so on when we get to the distribution manager discussion, or distribution point discussion coming up. Then we have components down on the child side. Again, SMSDB monitor, distribution manager, offer manager now, collection evaluator, policy provider, package transfer manager. All of these components may be familiar if you're, except for package transfer manager, that's new. Again, we'll talk about this more when we talk about DPs. But offer manager, collection evaluator, policy provider, those are familiar maybe in Configuration Manager 2007. These exist only on a child primary site. Why? Because the child primary site is responsible for managing clients. So it doesn't make any sense to have an offer manager at your CAS. Doesn't make any sense to have a policy provider at your CAS. Okay? So important things to understand. And so the information, the metadata that is acted on by these various components is actually synchronized by SQL replication. All right? But the content itself that's acted on by these components is synchronized by site-to-site communication. So distribution manager, you'll see, play a role acting on both kinds of data, site-to-site communication data, metadata, so on. So it's kind of separate and is separate, but it's also kind of mixed as well. And again, you'll see that. The actual site-to-site communication I will show you briefly today, but this is detailed. And site-to-site communication for moving content is not something that applies specifically to just packages or just application content. It applies to any kind of content that we want to move, whether it be imaging content, whether it be software update content. So that is a discussion that's important to have, and it's important to understand, but since it's not specific to packages, we'll briefly touch on it today, but then we'll have another session down the road where we focus specifically on site-to-site communication in terms of moving content. We'll also have a session down the road that focuses on SQL replication and how those pieces actually work to move information around in your hierarchy. Okay? So I kind of call these components out separately, the ones that are involved in site-to-site communication and then the ones that are involved in just regular SQL replication, regular database processing, that kind of thing within a site. And I have this section just to call out the differences between a CAS, between a primary site, and between a secondary site. Okay? Again, the only one of the three kinds of sites that can support clients is directly own clients as a primary site. All right, so we'll spend a lot of time moving through and doing some demo work showing the various components of Configuration Manager and the way data moves through the hierarchy. Then, or part of, kind of along with that, we have various tools that we're going to use to do this demo. One of the things you'll see me doing extensively is renaming DLL files. Basically, the reason I'm doing that is because Configuration Manager processes things so quickly that if I don't basically break certain components along the way, I can't really see in a controlled way the processing of these various items like I want to. Now, I'm doing this in my lab environment. This is absolutely something that you need to do if you're going to do it in just a lab environment, because as I mentioned, when you rename these files like I'm going to do, you're temporarily breaking Configuration Manager. And sometimes I've seen things go a little bit wonky with the system that required me to reboot or something like that. Typically not, but I've seen it. So you definitely don't want to be doing this in production. There are very corner scenarios where maybe you would want to do this in production, but they are not common at all, and should be done with the help of someone from the support organization at Microsoft, if that is even being considered. Okay, so but I do it here for demo. Another thing that you'll see me do is logging, and I'll use some of the generic logs to start with, and then go from there. And I'll talk about SQL tracing and SQL profiler as we go along. So that said, let's jump right into the demonstration. So let me pull my my lab over here into the screenshot. And so what I'm going to do is go through and build a package. It doesn't really matter what the package is. I don't really care. I'm not going to do anything with it except use it to demonstrate the various pieces that are at work while I'm in progress. So the first thing that I'm going to do, because I want to head off processing early on, is rename a DLL file. So I'm going to rename Distribution Manager and essentially stop it from processing. And then to make that go into effect, I have to restart the SMS executive. Oops. Wait for that to happen, then we'll start it back up and we'll be able to continue on. Alright, starting back up now. Oh, I forgot to press enter. There we go. Now it's starting. Alright, executive started back up. So now we can go ahead and create our package and have confidence that we can actually see what's going to happen behind the scenes because we've got some things stopped. So I'm going to actually create this in phases. Alright, so I'm going to use this wizard to create a new package. And this will actually result in creating a package and a program. Okay, so I'm just going to create test package. I'm going to tell it that we do have source files. Now, I'm creating this with source files. Again, it doesn't really matter what I choose. I'm just going to choose something as a placeholder here. I'm not actually deploying this to my distribution point yet. I'll do that in a little bit, and again, briefly show you what's happening in the site-to-site communication mechanism. But for now, I'm just going to point to the format or to the source directory and go from there. Again, doesn't really matter. I'm just creating a shell. So standard program is fine. Give it test program. All right, and browse for my command line, which is test app. And again, leave the defaults. All the requirements are default, and click next. So what I've done is essentially built a very generically defined package. I could go back into the package and add pieces or modify pieces or whatever that I needed to tweak beyond what was in the wizard if I wanted to, whatever. But essentially in Configuration Manager now, by going through that wizard, I've created what's called metadata. There's no content yet defined or set to be deployed. So the site-to-site communication mechanism is not engaged yet. It's just metadata. So as soon as I clicked OK, this information was, or even along the way, this information was stored into the Configuration Manager database by the SMS provider. And once it's in the Configuration Manager database, there's a component that watches that database, known as the SMS Database Monitor, that will act simply to wake up, to alert other components that need to further process the data, that there's data working there. Best way to show this is to show you what's going on in the logs. So let's pop into the logs here. And remember, anytime we're looking at logs, the timestamp is our friend. I have an advantage here of being a lab environment. So if you're really wanting to learn components, start in your lab, because we can control what kind of activity is taking place, what threads are running when, and so on. So a couple of key things. So I know, based on time, that I did the work I just showed you around 8:57, 8:56. So sure enough, at 8:56, we see the SMS provider is active and actually working in the environment. All right, so we'll start here. Now, I'll tell you, the SMS provider is probably the most active log of any in the environment that I've seen. All right, and it really depends on how busy your site is, really, because the SMS provider, again, is the interface between the admin UI and the database. So anything administrators are doing in the admin UI is typically, most things, I won't say anything, the vast majority of things that administrators are doing in the admin UI is filtering through the SMS provider. So if you have a number of consoles open and users working in the console, this log is extremely busy. All right, so just note that while I'm showing this to you, because I'm in the lab and you're not going to see this thing is moving, you know, at all right now, right? But that's not typical. So again, if you're trying to figure out how things work and so on, do it in an isolated lab environment where you can control things in the log and see things a little bit less busy than they would be in production. All right, so what I'm looking for is the natural split in time where the work I just did picks up, and here it is. Okay, so between 8:34, 8:56, we start back up. Now, I'm not going to walk you through every piece of this log, but what this log does show is basically all of the communication between the provider and the admin console, and there's other work the provider does too, to actually get this done. So let's just scroll down here for a minute and find. So here we're actually creating a new package. So this package ID is 40. Now, interestingly, you're going to see in many logs, you're just going to see the package ID displayed. You're not going to see the package name. Sometimes you will. It really depends on which log you're looking at. But the one thing you can tell right here is, notice my test package has the ID of 40. So I can tie together in the logs and know that this is the package that I'm actually working on. So we're going through, we're requesting packages, we're going to add them through the SMS provider log, different things. And some of this is a little bit maybe unclear at first to read, but you can start to get a real good sense of what's going on. So the way this works is really a combination of WMI queries to pull data back and WMI methods that will actually take the information that we're configuring and place it into the database. All right, notice, for example, that, let me scroll up a little bit, that here we're making a call out to SMS packages. Let's go up a little bit. Right here. Create an instance of class SMS package. Well, let me take a brief tangent for a minute and show you the instance of this class SMS package. All right, so let me run into WebMTest. And I'm going to connect up to a WMI namespace here. Now, this is the site server WMI namespace. All right, and if we look here, we'll run down and see that we have actually a class here named SMS package. Just scroll on down. Scroll down a long ways. Yeah, I just passed it over. SMS package. All right, so if I double click on this, look at all these. I have all of these methods that I can actually call to take action. So we can add changes, we can add distribution points, we can get package information, we can set source site, we can do all of these different things. So this is just one example. There's a number of these classes throughout that actually have methods. The methods are the ones that actually do the work to place things in the database and so on. So I won't belabor the point on WMI except to say there's a lot of stuff in WMI that may not be immediately apparent, but once you start digging through there, you start to realize all of the different things that are in play there. All right, so that's enough for SMS provider right now. This log, again, definitely is pivotal in all of the configuration work we do in the console. Now, other logs, other pieces that are key here. Notice SMS dbmon. So the console, through the provider, through WMI, inserted this metadata into the database of the CAS. All right. Well, there has to be some mechanism that will basically look into the database and notice that there have been changes here in terms of packages that need to be further processed, that will essentially wake up the other components of the executive that need to come alive and process those changes. Because just because we have the data that's in the database, that doesn't really get us where we need to be. We need to also replicate that data down to all of our child sites. That's done through SQL replication. Again, this is metadata. We also need to wake up other components in Configuration Manager to kind of process this, tweak it, and make other changes. All right. So this component, SMSDBmon, so this component, SMSDBmon, will watch for the changes and wake up other components. Then we have replication that happens. So replication is not handled by SMSDBmon. It just is there always in the background running to keep databases in sync. But you definitely notice that, well, and this has definitely moved on past our time frame. Notice 903 now. But you'll notice that RCM control is one of the logs that is constantly updating in your environment because we're constantly working to keep the database in sync. So whenever we placed our metadata in the database here, RCM control acted to move that data through SQL replication down to the child sites. Again, we'll talk about SQL replication in more detail later on. So to flag further processing of data that needs to be done in the database whenever there are changes made like this, SMSDBmon is the component that watches for that. So what you'll see is there's actually a notification here. If you read through this, you'll see, hey, we noticed, and we can actually look at the time differential too, by the way. So at 56:11 here, we notice there's a change on our notification table, PKG notification. All right. So we inserted, there was data inserted to the PKG notification table. Whenever that happens, and I'll show you that table in a minute, then SMSDBmon is watching that table, and it watches a couple of others. Okay, and when we see that insertion, we're going to actually create a file called a PKN. All right, so the PKN file is essentially a notification file. So it's going to be placed in distributionmanager.box. So now maybe it's clear why I stopped the distributionmanager.box component. I did not want Distribution Manager to process this until I had a chance to walk through this discussion we just had, and then I'll let it process in a minute. But for now, let's go take a look at distributionmanager.box and see what we have in there. All right, so Configuration Manager, inboxes, distributionmanager.box. And here we have now a few flag files, but we definitely see the flag file for our package ID 40. Now, if you look inside this file, you're going to see it doesn't have any contents. There's nothing in it. It's a zero-length file. This is just a flag file. That's it, right? If you look in your production environment, you shouldn't see PKN files here. Okay? These should move through the system very, very quickly. Again, they don't do anything except act as a flag. All right. So another piece that's kind of pivotal to here, I talk about DBmon watching the database. Well, what exactly is it watching? Well, I already mentioned that it's watching the PKG notification table, but let's go actually take a look at the PKG notification table and just see that. So here we have right here, PKG notification. Okay? So if I right-click on that and open table, or select all the columns out of it, as soon as my SQL Server wakes up, there we go, come on. Just a second, come on. All right, let's, now that it refreshed, let's try it again. Now, select top 1,000 rows. Sorry about that. So, again, typically you shouldn't see anything in this table. Typically things will just process through extremely quickly. But this is what you see right now because I have components shut down. So I see these same flag files, but represented here as database entries. So SMSDBmon watches this table, sees that there's a change to this package, and creates that notification file in Distribution Manager. Once Distribution Manager processes that, then this table will clean up. So again, this table should be empty in your production environment unless there's some sort of issue going on, typically. All right, so let's let Distribution Manager further process. So to do that, I'm going to have to rename Distribution Manager back. All right, good enough, and restart the executive. Oops. Stop it. And wait for that to stop, and then I'll restart it. All right, very good. So let's start it back up. Now, it'll take a second for SMS Executive to wake up all the different components. And so, by the way, what I want to do real quick, I keep talking about SMS Executive kind of being a parent service, and it is. Just to give you a feel, these are all of the different pieces that are part of the SMS Executive. So if you look at SMS Executive and look under threads here in the registry, you see all the different components that are part of SMS Executive. And you certainly see distribution manager is there and is part of it. But there are a bunch of other things too. So that's what I mean. It's a very important service because all of these different threads of the executive run through it. All right. So distribution manager should be fired back up by now. So let's go back and look. Actually, let's see if our table here has refreshed yet. Let's execute our query again. Come on, select top 1,000 rows. Nope, there's actually got more stuff in it, but it's moving along. You see a few more flag files or flag entries here in the database. Won't necessarily wait for this to clear, but anyway, so we see that moving along. We should have seen our flag file now is actually gone. So it looks like Distribution Manager is still starting up, so we should be able to see these process in just a minute. In the meantime, let me open back up the logs folder. At least make sure that Executive started. Okay, it did. That's good. And make sure I renamed it appropriately, like I should have. ConfigMgr. I did not. That's a problem. All right, hang on. I put an extra R in there. Should be distmanager.dll. Okay, and then I'm going to stop and restart the executive again. That's why doing this renaming, you have to be very, very careful. It's easy to slip up and make a mistake, and then things just won't work. So this is easy enough to fix. It's just a rename DLL that I need to adjust. So that'll stop and start, and then we're starting again. So let's go back into the log files. We'll watch Distribution Manager start up here. And again, the timestamp is our friend. We should see Distribution Manager right at the top of its processing loop. So there it wakes up. All right. Let's watch this for a minute and see when these clear, hopefully. Let me go ahead and pop up the log. There we go. We just cleared. While I'm here, let's go into the database table, and things are moving around now. Okay, execute the query again. Now, we're back to an empty state like we should be normally. All right, so now we can actually watch the Distribution Manager processing in the log. So let's pop that open. And here it's not going to be all that exciting data yet because all we're doing is moving metadata around. But if we go to the top of our processing loop here at 912, all right, so just skip past it. Here we go. So SMS Executive is starting up, and we have a little bit of preliminary work to do. Okay, and so here we're finding some package notification files, those PKN files that we were seeing in the Distribution Manager.box, which flags us there's work to do here. So I'm specifically interested in tracing the work with package ID 40, and here we go. So we're starting to add the package 40, that's our test package. Here's various package action flags and so on. Taking package snapshot of 40, this is the source directory. Again, we're not doing anything with the source yet, but we're starting to store it off because we have flagged this as being the source directory, so eventually the anticipation is we're going to deploy it. So we have the size information and so on, creating package signatures, pulling it in, and so on, then creating various hash algorithm stuff, and then we move on and create or start working on 2 and 1 and finish up 40 and so on. That's really it for now. All right. So easy enough. Now, if you look down at the primary site, you'll find that it now also has this exact same information. It already has it. In fact, it got it before our CAS did, because I did not disable Distribution Manager at the child site. So it went ahead and got all this information, went through this processing just like I showed you here. Okay, so easy enough, right? Now that we've processed through this information, just the basic information here, let's take a look back at our database and see what we've actually got. So I show you here the PKG notification table. That is the one that the first table, if you will, that kind of flags processing. But there are other tables that are called in to store various information about the packages. So the first place we'll start is the table SMS packages. Okay? So there's a couple of different tables here that store information, either global information, local information. Again, all that plays into SQL replication. But if I look in here, I can start to see where the different information is stored. Again, little tangent here for a minute. I'm showing you this information really as education. It's not anticipated that you're going to need to get into the database and work at this level and so on very often. If you do, just treat this kind of as a look but don't touch kind of scenario. There are times that working with a Microsoft engineer that you will need to get into the database and do various things, but it always needs to be in that context. All right. So here's various information in the global store for the packages, and again I have my package IDs. All right. So let's scroll down. We'll see a package ID of 40. Here's my test package. Now some of this information I did not choose to fill in. If I would have filled that in the UI, it would show here. Here's my package source directory. Here's the site that actually owns the package. All right, and the site ownership is important. Typically, you're going to have the site ownership at your CAS. All right. Last time it was refreshed, the various flag files that go along with the package content, and so on. Right. So I'll just scroll on over. A lot of this is not really meaningful unless you know what you're looking at. Source version of the file, what its size is. And so on. So notice over here, here's the hash information for the content. So that's pivotal to make sure that the content stays in check up and down the chain. Actually, that's interesting for a minute. So talked about in previous discussions the content validation flag on the distribution points and so on. That's really kind of what the hash is used for. It's to maintain the continuity of content as it moves throughout distribution points and so on in the environment, to make sure the content at the distribution points and so on has not changed from the source. So here we've computed the hash of the package that we can use for comparison purposes elsewhere. All right, so moving on, then there's a package type flag. So here we see 0, we see a bunch of 8s. All right, and we'll see what those package types translate to in just a minute. So that's the SMS packages G table. Then we have the SMS packages L table. So here we have, again, local data. We have our package 40, okay, various flag files and so on that are in place, actions and stuff that you need to have an understanding of what this means to really interpret it. Again, the package type. So if you look down, you'll see a table that defines what the various package types are. So select the rows, and again we see the package type of 0 is a standard package, package type of 8 is an application package, and then all the different options that are available for types of packages that might be out there that we need to process. Okay, we're focused on packages today. All right, and then the package hash values that are stored, the history of packages and so on. So the SMS packages tables and associated are kind of the starting blocks for packages, if you will, holding the information that you inputted into the UI and more than that as well, and making it available in the database, replicating it around, that kind of thing. There's other tables here that are also important, such as the PKG tables themselves. Now, some of these PKG tables won't be filled out yet, so but we can talk about them. So, for example, as we did the walk through our wizard, we not only created the package, we created a very basic program. So PKG programs contains that information. Again, a G and an L flag to represent the kind of data it is. So if we select our top 1,000 rows on the global data, we'll see, again, here's our program ID, and it maps specifically to our package ID. Now, it is very possible, just like with an application, you can have multiple deployment types, you can have multiple programs with a given package. So if you have more than one, then you'll list them out here and tie them to the package and so on. See the name of the program, see the command line for the program, and then various information that would be here if certain parts of the UI were in place, dependent programs, so on, stuff that we didn't configure. The source site, the various program flags dictating action for the program, how long the maximum runtime is. So again, you start to see how some of those configurations we make in the UI actually translate here to what's in the database. All right, and so on, right? So here we have all this. Then we have the local data. And again, we have our mapping. So notice that here we have a 40 and a program ID of 42. Okay, and then here's the test program we created, and more information about it. Okay, so pretty again, for information where this is, some of this you won't be able to interpret a lot of it really without knowing the back end beyond what we'll discuss, but it's here. Then we have other tables that are interesting. So PKG servers, we'll come back to this in a little bit. This will map your content for your packages to the appropriate distribution points. Let's look in here right now for a minute, and you'll see as we scroll down, there is nothing here about a package ID of 40. Reason why? We have not associated distribution points yet. Okay, PKG access, this will be our standard access credentials for various package content. So you see here, for example, again, all I have is the default permissions, so I have the ability for administrators as well as users to access the content for this package on distribution points. All right, and that can be configured. Package program OS, so here defines what OSs might be relevant for the package. I don't have anything here because I haven't specified any particular restrictions. All right, and PKG status, this will be our status information for the given package. I should have some stuff in here at this stage. Nope, not yet. All right, so that'll come up in the next step. All right, so you get the idea in history for the package status and so on. All right, so that's all done. We're good to go. But just by having the package created, just by having the program created, we haven't done anything yet except define the piece that we want to actually deploy. We haven't done a deployment yet. We haven't staged the content yet. Okay. Oh, and by the way, before I move on, notice that any time you come through and make a change to this package, it's going to go through this same kind of process. It has to be updated at our distribute, or it needs to be updated in our database. It needs to be replicated down to our child site. So if I come in here and make a simple entry into the comment field and hit OK, and then watch the logs, I won't go into each one again, but just watch the timestamp on the logs. Let's sort again by date modified. All right, here we are. Then you see here's the provider again. Here's the SMSDB on again. Here we'll see distribution manager crop up in the list. Let me sort it again so we can get the ones up there. So yeah, here's distribution manager processing again. So that exact processing loop that we just talked about is happening again just because I made a simple modification. Here is our replication going on to take it down to the child sites. Okay, so let's put in a couple more pieces to the puzzle. All right, and now what I want to do is actually create a deployment for my test package. So this is actually going to tie things to collections of either users or devices. Now, I should have said this earlier, but let me pause here. While we're on the server side, the whole effort of what we're trying to do is get things ready for the client to learn about the data, or learn about the instructions that need to happen and take action. The ultimate end of this process is to have policy prepared for the client to access and download and take action. Once we get through the policy creation part, then we're really done on the server side. That's the differentiator, right? So we get the policy ready on the server side, and then the client, which we'll see in a future session, will actually, on a schedule or manually when you trigger it, request new policy. It'll talk to the management point. Management point runs some SQL queries to find out what policies are actually available for the client, and then downloads those policies. Client learns about it. Then all of the work that we're doing here begins to take effect. Okay, so we'll now move toward the process of associating this package to the appropriate systems that need to, or users could be as well, that need to retrieve it and take action upon it. So we'll do a deployment. Now notice I have not distributed content yet. Okay, so I'll deploy this. And it's going to ask me what collection. I'll just go ahead and use a device collection, hit OK. All right. And now it's going to ask me to distribute the content. I haven't done it. I will do it because I have to. But then I'll actually show you this processing in the back end. What's going to happen now, I will show you again in the back end in just a minute. Actually, I'll probably use this and just show you all of this at the same time. Probably be easier. Okay, so I'll just set this as available. Oops. All right, and I'll just not set any particular anything here and just roll forward. And now I've actually begun the work of trying to link things up. So now I have identified a collection, in my case the all systems collection, that needs to receive this program, this package, and be able to run this package. So the work that's going to happen to make that linkage take place is, first we have to evaluate all of the different devices that are in the all systems collection and create policy for all of them. All right, that process is done by a component called Offer Manager. Offer Manager is kind of a term that stuck around for a while. It's a component that's been around since SMS 2.0, and that's its job, is to see new offers, if you will, new deployments for clients in collections, specifically in the package world here. That component plays, and make that mapping. All right. Well, here's the interesting thing. That component, Offer Manager, does not exist on the CAS. So in order for Offer Manager to actually see this information, we have to take the configuration that was just done and replicate it down through SQL replication to the CAS. So if we look, and I just made a mistake. Hang on. I'll fix it here in just a minute. In fact, I'm going to illustrate that by deleting the deployment, and I'll set it back up in just a second. But you'll see, let me just go ahead and do this while I'm here, that we have the same kind of activity. We have similar threads. We have the SMS provider that was active. Let me sort this again. It's not sorting. Anyway, the SMS provider was active. We'll just look at the timestamp so we can see that. Yeah, so it was active a little bit ago to actually introduce those changes we made in the UI. Then we will also have replication that has to take this information down and move it to our child site, just like before. So the key is that Offer Manager on the child site has to actually process that. So that's the piece that I forgot to do. I forgot to disable the processing on the child site side. So let me go over to my primary site and actually do that real quick, and then I'll kind of force this to happen again. So here's my primary site, and I'm just going to, like before, stop the executive and rename a couple of components. So here, see how good my typing is here whenever the buffer actually shows what was displayed. Alright, so there we go. Rename in progress. Alright, starting the executive again. Oh, one other thing while I'm here, just to do both. It'll take me stopping and restarting the executive again. So Offer Manager on the child side is the one that is going to be notified, if you will, to process this deployment. Let me stop it again 1 second. There's actually another piece after Offer Manager called Policy Provider that also will process this, so I'm going to go ahead and stop it too, or disable it too. Any minute. Take it a second longer, probably because I had just started it back up, and then I immediately stopped it again. So take it a second or two. There we go. So now let's start it back up. All right, good enough. So now we are stopped over at the primary site. So let's go back and clean up our deployment at the CAS, and I'll do it again. Okay. So I've got my deployment here, and I want to track it. So let me go ahead and remove it, and then I'll recreate it. And interestingly, let me do something a little bit different this time. I typically in the lab here just use all systems just because it's convenient, but I want to show differently what's actually happening, kind of so we can track it. So let me do a deployment and use a different collection. I'll use our maintenance window collection that I had created from previous work. All right, and now I'll roll through this. Now I've already got the content deployed, so that's cool. I'll show this to you in the logs, the content deployment piece. I'll set this as available. All right, click next, next, and off we go. All right, so that's rolling down. So while we're on the CAS side, deployment's now created. While we're on the CAS side, let's look at the logs. Again, I showed you partially, kind of what's going on here with the provider, with distribution manager. With the provider, with replication having to go on, and so on. So here's the provider. It's active again right now, 9:33. So we're tracking along. Other logs, let's sort by date modified, that are active around the same time. Again, we see replication happening up here, and so on. So the interesting stuff at this point is really not on the CAS, because we've already gone through that processing loop where we make modifications to the metadata, how that's processed, so on. So it's just a repeat of the same thing. The one piece that we did add here, because we had to in the deployment, is a distribution point. Right now, I already had it the second time around, but the first time around I added it. So what that does, all of the data so far, the metadata, has been moving back and forth between sites with SQL replication. Now we actually have to communicate the content down to our child site. That's done through our site-to-site communication mechanism. Again, I'm not going to go off in the weeds on that to a great deal. I'll do that in another session. But just to give you a flavor of this. So the way this works is once Distribution Manager finishes processing, in fact, let's look at Distribution Manager now just to see the extra processing loop that happened whenever we went through. I'm going to sort it alphabetically now for convenience. When we went through and added the content, Distribution Manager had to actually work on that content to get it down to our child site. So if we look back at Distribution Manager log, we'll actually see the processing loop that took place at that time. So again, timestamp being our friend, let's see some natural breaks here. So 9:23, that looks to be about the time frame that we were looking for. So let's go to the top of that processing loop. All right. So found our package, properties, found our notification. Now this time we need to start updating the package. All right. Looks like I'm in the wrong time frame. Let's find the next one. I'll cheat a little bit and find that entry. One moment. There we go. All right, good. So it's in this processing loop. So here we see that we are starting to work on the package, and then we work on. There's no real change to metadata now. We've just got a distribution point added, the deployment added, but by adding the distribution point, we notice now that we need to send a copy of the package content to our primary site. Okay, we also notice that the content needs to be compressed. Okay, so we start doing that. So we're going to use the drive C for storing our compressed file. Again, I just have one drive, and so on. So we do all of that very, very quickly. Again, this is a very small package. Okay, and then after we're done compressing, we create what's called a mini job to cause that content to be sent to our child site. Okay? So from here what happens is this mini job is actually placed into a component called Replication Manager. Let's follow the timestamp, 926. So if we look at Replication Manager, log, there's a lot more we could look at in terms of file systems and different things, which we won't do today. But if we look in Replication Manager log, here at 926, looks like Replication Manager log hasn't updated, but it should have. Let's open this another way. Actually, so if we look in scheduler log, it looks like that might have. I wonder if that's true. Yeah. So if we look in our distribution manager log, we see that it's realizes there's change to be done for package 40, and we start processing that. And one of the first things we recognize is that we need to actually send content this time, right? So we're going to send our content, our package source, down to primary site 1, and we need to send that copy. So we're going to compress that first, just to save on bandwidth. Then we're going to use drive C, only have one drive, to compress that content, and then we're going to create what's called a mini job to send that content down. All right. So we created here we're setting the content. Here we're creating a mini job to send it down. So what that simply means, and all that happens very quickly. This is a small package. So what that simply means is that we have now called into the SMS executive to find other components, to trigger other components that need to actually come awake to deploy this content. Again, I'm not going to get off in the weeds on this, just to quickly show you what those are. So the mini job is actually handled by a component called scheduler. So when we create the mini job, ultimately it gets into scheduler. And if we scroll down, we'll see this component called schedule.log. And this is a very busy, again, typically log on a production site that's moving a lot of content around. And now we can just see, if we go to our timestamp of 26, let's see if we can find this. Oops, all right, skipped a little bit too far up. All right, so we see a little bit of work here. We have a job to distribute our package ID. Okay. And then we go through, here's our destination site as PS1, where we have to create some instruction files. We're creating one, transfer route This is our compressed copy of the package. So we're calculating our signature hashes and so on. Now the job is active. All right, so then we move on. We create a new send request for the package, and here the package content starts to roll. All right, so our send request, here's our CAS, here's our job ID, here's our destination site, and we have different flag information that we can track along the way, how the total size is, how much is remaining, and so on. But the scheduler doesn't do anything, and again, I'm not going to keep going through this log. The scheduler doesn't do anything except schedule the content, keep track of the content. The actual piece that does the transfer is called sender. Okay, so here, if we look in sender along the same time frame, we should see that sender is actually connected up to our primary site and moved the content. In fact, here it is. Right, so pretty quick stuff. It just has to go, and we found our send request. We're creating a sending thread, trying our first address. That's our site-to-site address. So here's our instruction file. We start moving the content. We're writing files back and forth. All right, and then we're done. Okay, so now it's arrived at our child site. So all of the information that we send from site to site actually moves from sender to a piece called despooler on the receiving end. Then despooler actually works on it, moves it around, and so on. So now let's make the transition over to our primary site. And here's where we will finish up our brief discussion about the site-to-site communication mechanism and also see the result of our offer that we created. So if we look back at our inboxes, we have this one called despooler. So dspool.box will be empty now, but this is the location that we actually will send those files. When you saw sender copying those files across, it was going into this box. All right. So evidence of that, we can just look in the sender log. So let's look in our log files, or the despooler log. Let's look in our log files real quick. Here's despool. Again, along the same time frame as before, we should be able to track this through. So looks like I think the time zone's actually shifted here, but you see what we're doing here. We're actually found an instruction file, we're processing that, looking it up, validating it, and so on, and then moving it on. So despooler validates the content and then either forwards it on to a child site if it needs to, or if it's destined for the site that we're at, then it will hand it over ultimately to the component that's necessary to process it. In this case, it would be distribution manager. So we would see the distribution manager processing at this site the same way we did at CAS for staging the content, metadata, that kind of thing. In this case, distribution manager would copy the content out. So let's follow that loop for a minute. So here's distribution manager. And here we should see a package ID of 40 being acted on. Let me again cheat a little bit and find that in the log. Find it up. And do it again, do it again. I need to find it a little bit more clearly. CAS. Yeah, try that. There we go. Find it again. There we go. So 40. So again, we see that we have the processing loop taking place here for this information as it runs in, and that's all I'm going to go into for this. All right. So that's kind of a peek at the site-to-site communication mechanism. Again, we'll do that in a more detailed form in a future session, but wanted to show you that while we had a chance to at least illustrate it. Now, back to what we were talking about. We created a deployment at the CAS, and the CAS, in order to get that deployment handled, we need to create a mapping so that the collection members, in my case it was the maintenance window collection, just has one member. We map the deployment to each one of those devices. Said another way, we create policy for each one of those devices to come run that content. So the way we see that is we can certainly start over and look at our different components that are involved. So after we do our replication, there's the SMSDB monitor piece that has to play here as well. So ultimately, when we do our replication, it's going to be in the database, and we're going to see there's work to do to actually get policy created, actually get the deployment resolved as to where all it's going to go, and so on. So here we can just look in the SMSDB-mon log along around the time frame. Again, I'm going to cheat and search a little bit because it's probably moved a little bit since then. Look for a flag file called OFN. So that's called an offer notification flag. Right. So searching for that, here we see that we actually created a flag file called an OFN in our offermanager.box. Okay, so that is the result of the database replication, bringing that information to our child site database, and then SMSDB-mon watching the offer manager or the offer notification table, which I'll show you here. So let's go down. Those are views. Let me go up a little bit. Offer notification. So here's that table, again, just like package notification, and that it's just a place where we have flag entries to indicate further processing is required. So opening that up, we see a couple there, right? So that's what SMSDB-mon is reading to create these flag files. And so once we have these flag files created, that alerts Offer Manager there's work to be done. So if we look over in our inboxes for Offer Manager, here, if my mouse cooperates, here's Offer Manager. We should have a flag file here. Couple now. So again, once we free up Offer Manager, which we'll do now, then restart executive. All right, then we should see those files start to process, and we can see some details in the Offer Manager log. Not a ton, but certainly good information to help us understand what's going on. So we'll let that process, and we'll go over here to the Offer Manager log and be ready once this information clears. So, oops, didn't mean to do that. So here's the Offer Manager log. So we'll just pull this to the side and wait for those files to disappear. There we go, starting to process. So Offer Manager's woken up. So here, looking at timestamps, again, we start to see the processing loop. We're processing a new offer. Here, it's actually targeted to, this is still the all systems. Let's see the one that just came in. Yeah, here's the one I want. So this has to be our offer because notice the collection has changed. This one I know is all systems. This one is, and notice, by the way, just again, trivia, this is all systems, and it also starts with an SMS prefix. So I know that is a system collection. So I can, again, I know it's the all systems, but even if I didn't, I would know it's a default collection. This is one that's custom defined because it starts with the site code where it was defined, and I only have one custom defined one. So I know this is the one that I'm interested in. All right. So here we notice that we have new offers to process. We notice that it's targeted to this collection, okay? And then we further notice that as we evaluate this collection, we find out we only have one resource in the collection, which is exactly right. That's the one that I created, has one device in it, and we have to prepare policy for that one resource. Offer Manager, though, doesn't actually prepare the policy. We see what's happening here, and we can track it along, but just reading this one line, you would think maybe that Offer Manager prepares the policy. It actually doesn't. There's another component called Policy Provider that prepares the policy. So if we go back to our inbox and look now at Policy Provider, you'll see that it has the same flag file in it that we just processed. It's over here, Offer Notification, waiting now for processing by Policy Provider. So let's go free that up. And again, restart the executive. Now, the policy provider log, when it starts up, is a bit of a busy log to read. So I'm just going to point out a couple of key areas in it just to illustrate that we have finished preparing policy, and we'll look in the database table to close the loop and so on. All right, so let's let that restart, and it looks like it did. So restart the executive. All right, so now everything should be back in order. We should have a working site completely. We should see these files processed in just a minute. So like before, let's go over to Policy Provider and get the log ready to take a look at. So here it is. As it starts up here, we should see the loop. So again, it still hasn't started. Now it has. All right, so there's some initial work that has to be done. You'll see it loop here for a minute, and then you'll ultimately see these files come into play and get processed. There we go. All right, so moving along. Still processing, still in part of its initial startup loop. All right, so now we should be getting close. Okay, so it just processed the changes. I'm going to pause that and look at this. In fact, the only place I really want to show is a line like this. So we found those files, we processed them. There's a lot of other things that are happening here too, but ultimately we see successfully updated the resource to policy mapping for one resource. So this is the one device in our collection that we needed to update because we had sent the deployment. So that actually is done by policy providers. So again, the end of the day, what we're trying to do on the server side is get policy created for our devices to come retrieve. We've now done that. So policy provider is the end of the loop, if you will, for processing for this discussion. But there's a couple of other places to show you just real quick while we're talking about policy. So just like we have package tables, program tables, and so on, we also have policy tables. So here's the various policy tables at play. So if we look at the policy table, some of these are very cryptic by design, by nature. So if we look at the policy tables, we can see all the different policy files that are out there, the version of the policy files, and so on. We can see the names of the policy IDs for the file, and so on, right? And then we can actually see the policy body. Now this is pretty meaningless to us, but it's very meaningful to the system. Okay, policy flags and whatever. This isn't the most interesting table in the world, policy hash, but the pieces that are interesting here is policy assignments. So here we can actually see the policy as it's assigned. So ultimately, if we scroll down, we can see the policy assignment ID. We see the PAD-BID file. Here's the policy ID from the policy table. So notice this actually is ours that we just were interested in. So this is our CAS identifier information, kind of mapping it through. All right, and other information here, but the main thing is that we really care about at this stage, other stuff that's pretty cryptic here. Right, the main thing we care about at this stage is our PAD-BID, the policy assignment ID, and we can see the policy ID. All right, so with all of that, we can now look at the policy collection map. All right, and select top 1,000 rows on it, and scroll down. In here, we see the PAD-BID and the associated target collection ID. So this is probably the one we care about here, 13. We'll validate that in a minute. And then all the different associations with that. Okay, so here we exactly see the policy body as it's mapped to target collections. All right, and so on. All right, so that's enough. Let's go look at and validate, though, the collection ID. The easiest way to do that is in the views. So if I go to my views for collections, scroll down a little bit, here we go. So let's see what a collection ID of 13 is. So here we see a collection ID of 13 actually translates to this collection site ID, and here's the friendly name. So we did target our maintenance window collection, therefore that's the way it maps all the way through, right? Again, are you going to need to be at this level? Not very often, right? But certainly it gives a good feel for how everything works end to end behind the scenes, getting policy ready for clients. All right, so there's one other thing I want to show you before we kind of wrap the session. So that's end to end, the detail, what I wanted to show you. But there's one other piece that's interesting. So we keep going back to the tables and seeing how things work, and so sometimes you might wonder, okay, well, how do you exactly figure that out? How do you know that certain information gets added to different tables? Well, there's a really cool ability in ConfigMgr to enable additional logging, in this case known as SQL tracing. So if you come into this registry key, there's a value called SQL enabled. You can change that to 1, and now all of the SQL I say all, a good number of the SQL transactions that are necessary to perform certain actions are going to get dumped into their relevant log files. I won't belabor this point, but just to show you what I mean. So if I now come into this to this package and remove our common information, again, just to cause a change to happen and hit OK, then go into the distribution manager log, we're going to see a bit of a different story. Okay, so here's ConfigMan. Let's go into distribution manager log. And it's not just distribution manager, it's any log really that writes information to the database. So here's distribution manager log, and notice what we see now. All of these SQL transactions. So as we're running through the log now, instead of seeing the nice lines, concise, step by step what's going on, you're going to see those, but interspersed between them, you're going to see all of the SQL transactions that need to be executed, whether they be updates, inserts, select statements, whatever it is, to cause that work to happen. So very easily then, you can track where that action is taking place in the database by looking at the logs. And for the vast majority of use cases, just enabling SQL tracing is very effective and very useful. But in some cases, the SQL transactions, the SQL statements, are too long for the log file, and they do get truncated. So in those scenarios, it is useful to have another mechanism to track things down, and that other mechanism is called SQL Profiler. So if you need to run something that's even more specific, something you can control a little bit better, hone in on certain tables, whatever the case may be, with SQL, there's a tool provided called SQL Profiler. Very, very useful to understand transactions against your config manager database, any database, really. So if that's of interest to you, certainly get to know and appreciate SQL Profiler. So that said, I'm done talking about packages, and again, kind of a reminder of the roadmap forward. In the next session, we'll kind of walk through the same kind of thing, but for applications. Then we'll take a pause and focus on distribution manager or distribution point internals specifically and how those work. Then move back to the client side and start to see policy as it's picked up and implemented, how that works on the client side for packages, for applications. So we'll see you in the next session.